Hello, welcome back to Bored with Paint. Today we'll be continuing our series on how to paint HeroQuest. This time I'll show you how to speed paint the skeletons. Just as with the orcs in the previous episode, I'll be using the slap chop technique to paint these up. In addition to the basic sculpt for the skeletons, I'll also be showing you how to paint the alternate sculpt that came with the Mythic Tier. I've already primed and prepared the miniatures. If you want to see how that's done, you can look at the previous video. As before, we'll be starting with a pretty heavy dry brush using a heavy-bodied titanium white. I'm just using a cheap makeup brush to do this, but any old brush should work fine. This gets applied liberally to the entire miniature. This initial dry brush is important to the slap chop technique because it not only provides extra contrast, but it also gives you an edge highlight for free. The other half of the slap chop technique is to apply a one-coat paint for all the different surfaces of the miniature. I'm going to be using the Army Painter speed paints for this, but it's also equally applicable to use the Vallejo Express colors or Citadel's contrast paints. There are probably other options out there that I'm not even aware of. To give the miniatures some variation, I'll be using two different colors of bone. For the first group, I'm using Pallid bone. I'm applying this to the skull and the exposed areas of the arms, legs, and hands. Since this is a speed paint, we want to apply this in a fairly thick coat and allow it to pull into the recesses. This will give a tint to the raised and highlighted areas while leaving the recesses with a nice deep shadow. You'll notice as you apply this that the areas where the white was dry brushed on give even more contrast than you would get had you had a solid undercoat. I painted about half of the skeletons with this color, and the other half are going to get bony matter. I personally preferred the pallid bone look, however I think bony matter matches the card artwork a little better. For the Mythic Tier skeletons, I decided to use pallid bone on both of them. Next, we'll cover all of the leather areas with hardened leather. This will cover most of the armor on the upper torso, but I'm also using it for the arm wrap and the leg wraps. I'm also painting the belt with this. There's much less leather on the Mythic Tier figures, mainly the belt and the straps around some of the armor. We'll also use this to paint the pouches on the belt. With that done, we'll move on to the armor. For the chainmail and the scale armor on both skeletons, I'm using straight up Runefang Steel from Citadel. This isn't really part of the slap chop technique since it's not a speed paint, but the options for metallics in that line are very limited, and I personally only own 3 metallic colors. For the Mythic Tier skeletons, I'm covering all of the chainmail around the head and shoulders, and the scale armor around the waist. For the base game skeletons, there's only a little bit of scale armor around their belt line. Next, I'll be painting the cloth around each skeleton's waist. I'm using magic blue here to match the card artwork, but to give some variety, I use a few different colors on different skeletons. Also, in the spirit of the card artwork, I'm using the same color as the fabric to use on the wraps on the weapon. And here I'll show you some of the other colors I use. For this one, I used Moody Mauve. I did a few skeletons using Ghoul Green. And the rest I did with Ochre Clay. I also decided to use Ochre Clay on the handles of the swords held by the Mythic Tier skeletons. I really wanted the face on the shield of the Mythic skeletons to stand out, so I decided to paint it with Slaughter Red. I'm leaving the outside and backside of the shield though. This will be covered with our armor color later. Now, before painting the furry parts of the leg wraps and arm wraps, I decided to give them a quick coat of titanium white. It can be problematic sometimes to put light colored speed paints over existing speed paints because it shows through. Adding a layer of white first will allow the new color to completely take over that area. While the white dries, I decided to go back in with Runefang Steel and paint some of the wraps at the top of the scythes. With the white dry, we can go and apply warrior skin to all the furry areas. For all of the wooden parts of the handles of the scythes, I'm using Brownish Decay. Now to add some definition to the armor areas that we've painted already. To do this, I'm mixing some Dollar Rowney Payne's Gray ink with a little bit of water, probably about a 50-50 mix. This will create a nice blackish blue wash that we can use on the armor areas. This is being applied over all of the chainmail and scale armor areas that we painted previously. Since we thinned it down, it should mostly pool in the recesses and leave the upper areas still highlighted metal. And since we're using ink and not acrylic paint, it shouldn't cut down on the sheen of the metal. And let's not forget the little scale areas on the base game skeletons. For the rest of the armor, we're using the exact same recipe we used on the orcs. This is about a 50-50 mix of Brodesode silver and Payne's Gray ink. I'm then applying this over all of the unpainted armor. I'm also using this on the lower parts of the scythe blades. We'll want the sharp parts of the blades themselves to be a bit brighter, so leave them unpainted. Aside from the leg and arm armor, I'm also using this on the Mythic Tier skeletons' helmets and the sides of the shield that we didn't cover in red, and also the back side of the shield. I'm covering some parts of the front of the shield with this as well. I didn't really have any plan for this as there's no card artwork for these skeletons, so I just played around with what I thought looked good. To give the face even more contrast, I'm painting the inside of the mouth with this color and also the inside of the eyes. We'll do a bit more work on this face a little bit later. And finally, I'm painting the handguard of the sword and the strip down the center. For the eyes of the shield, I want there to be a little bit of a glow, so I'm starting off by painting the innermost portions with Troll Slayer Orange. Jumping around a little bit, I'm now applying Ironbreaker to the blades of all the weapons. So this is going on both the edges of the sword and the sharpened blades of the scythes. I'm also using this to edge highlight all of the darker metal. Moving over to the base game skeletons, I'm painting the blades of their scythes with this, in addition to doing the edge highlighting as we did on the others. I also decided to use Ironbreaker to paint the studs on the belts of both types of skeletons. Now to boost the shadows of that armor, I'm mixing some Payne's Gray ink with some water and some flow enhancer. This should give us a wash with low viscosity and it should really settle into the recesses. I'm adding this anywhere I want the metal to be darker, including the lower portions of the scythe blades. While waiting for that to dry, I decided to paint the bases using Rakarth Flesh. Since this is a very light color, you'll probably need 2 or 3 coats to get a nice coverage. I felt like the skulls did not have enough detail to really show the teeth, so I'm mixing some black and brown ink together and using that to essentially draw in the teeth. Here I'm wicking off the brush so I can keep control over it. I'm not following any sculpt or anything here, I'm just drawing a line where I think the break would be in the jaw, and then putting some little indications of vertical lines where I think the teeth would be. I'm not too worried about making mistakes here, because if I make a line too big by accident, it'll just look like the skull is missing a tooth or two, and I like the variety that adds. I'm also using this to fill in the eyes and nose to make them nice and dark. I realized that the card artwork shows sort of a magic glow coming from the skeleton's mouth and eyes, but I decided not to paint that in because the skeleton's mouths are all closed, and I thought the dark eyes really made them look scarier. But we will brighten the eyes on the shield of the Mythic Tier skeletons. For this, I'm painting some Marduk Yellow in the middle of the orange that we previously painted. We could probably call it done here, but I decided to add a little bit of highlighting to the shield by mixing some Beherit Orange in with the Slaughter Red Speed Paint. For this, I'm just highlighting the way I would highlight anything else, using a few layers of the brighter color to call out some of the raised areas and staying out of the recesses. Here I'm boosting the highlight with some Troll Slayer Orange and applying it over the previous highlights in a smaller area. Now I'm mixing in some yellow that I had on my palette and thinning it down a bit with some speed paint medium. This will be the final highlight, and I think the effect is subtle but effective. And there we have the final skeletons. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. I know everybody asks for the same thing, but it really does help the channel and helps me to create more content. If you're interested in seeing more HeroQuest content, you can check out some of my other videos in this series, or write a comment and let me know who you'd like to see me paint next. Here's a shot of all the skeletons I painted for this project. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy painting.